Digimon Adventure is a great anime series, and a good short film, and also an okay video game. But I'm starting to regret getting into 3 pieces of media that all have the same name. History lesson: since Digimon is primarily only known by a small group of people in the West, everyone a few years older than me was too old for it and never got hooked. Everyone a few years younger than me grew up in a world where it was already dead as far as the Western world was concerned. Though Digimon never actually died, there's always been new games, new shows, new movies, and they've been released on a fairly consistent schedule, and this never stopped. Even if most didn't get official localizations, or only did after the fanbase demanded them for years. Okay, listen up, anyone I consider old or young. 1996 and 1997 saw the rise of a virtual pet called a Tamagotchi, and it was so mainstream that I won't dwell on it, you probably know what it is, but the point is, it was owned by Bandai. In 1997, they wanted to expand the Tamagotchi line, so we got its own spin-off of virtual pets who were able to fight each other by linking up 2 separate devices. This was to appeal even more to young boys at the time. These were called digital monsters, which was shortened to Digimon, an unfortunate name since Pocket Monsters took the world by storm too. And despite being almost nothing alike, comparisons were made. I like both, but I couldn't go anywhere without my Digimon. It was a responsibility. I had to feed it, I had to clean up after it, and I had to train it to be the ultimate fighter. And I'd repeat this endlessly since they would always die, and that's how they get you. You can't be done raising one unless you want to be a neglectful parent that leads all these pixels to death. Bandai were quick to capture the lightning in a bottle they had, as 1998 saw the first media of Digimon outside of being a small toy. First we got the Digimon manga, which expanded the world, and due to the popularity of this in Shonen Jump, multiple video games were pushed through, even if most were for Bandai's own handheld. These early efforts, like the manga and the first Digimon World game, were all based around the virtual pet identity the series had, since this was all the identity Digimon really had. But the franchise's scope was immediately made much larger with 1999's short film Digimon Adventure, which kind of served as a pilot to the anime series released later the same year, also called Digimon Adventure. We have 2 Digimon Adventure 1999s. Now, the show depicted a parallel world to the human world called the digital world, and in this continuity at least, it's kind of a strange fantasy world where technology and nature are basically interlinked. Phone booths are just as much of a part of nature as trees, but they don't actually function as phones. This is just what is natural to them. This whole world is basically made of data and code, but it's a relatable one, and now it's quite interesting to see considering this whole idea is more often than not linked to a kind of Matrix-y style cyberspace. Now in the anime, 7 young kids go to camp for the summer and they wind up living in a digital land. What starts out as a way to escape this new world turns into much more. Within children's media standards, I mean. They develop as characters, they learn to overcome their weaknesses, and most importantly, they get to promote new toys as Digimon have a lot of different forms, and they are almost all marketable and cool. These are monster friends to the boys and girls, champions of a digital world. It was a great children's anime of the era, and it still holds up now, especially if you watch the original Japanese version. The dub is less good, but it's kind of a guilty pleasure. The show knew when to be dramatic, and when to touch on more sensitive topics that children go through. And most importantly, it knew when to show me a giant cybernetic dinosaur shooting missiles out of his breasts. Though I'm not really here to talk about the show, I want to talk about the game adaptation for PSP. This is what matters to me, and boy do I feel conflicted. For starters, this is a fan translation, link in the description, and since it's more of a direct translation, this might be jarring to fans that are only familiar with the official English media. Digimon aren't for champions for adult level, and this will get confusing, so I just need to deal with this. In this video, I'll be using the Japanese nomenclature, so I will call certain Digimon Ultimates, even though in the official Western release, they are called Megas. I'm only highlighting this because most levels you can kind of assume what they mean, but ultimate means two different things depending on who you talk to. In the West, Metal Greymon is an ultimate, but in Japan, Metal Greymon is a perfect, whereas War Greymon is an ultimate. I don't know who to blame for this, it's just what you have to deal with as a Digimon fan. So here are the forms. There's baby, child, adult, perfect, and ultimate. I've been dealing with this for years, you just get used to it. Also, some of the names of both the humans and Digimon are different, but surprisingly the English localization was quite faithful in directly adapting names and not removing the fact that it was set in Japan with Japanese characters. There are a few small things like Vandamon and Tailmon, but for the most part the names are basically the same as what you grew up with 20 years ago. One note is that because this is a fan translation, some of the English words don't quite fit properly within the UI. It's not a big deal, and you wouldn't see this in a commercial localization, but this is just a fan patch, so cut them some slack, it's a labour of love. The story of Digimon Adventure does kind of translate well into video game form, and the show being split up into multiple chapters with their own kind of big bad does work well as an RPG. Though things that aren't inherently weaknesses in the show do interfere with the flow of this game. We have a lot of cool monsters to use, but Digimon Adventure, especially later on, does basically boil down to the Taichi and Yamato show, with Takeru basically doing nothing until the very specific moments where he is important. It works for an anime, even if some people will be sad we didn't get more Mimi and Joe, it still worked, and we, the audience, were passive in watching all 4 recycled clips over and over. But here, we get to choose our team and okay, who are we going to use? The Digimon that can go perfect level, or Takeru's little child Digimon? Plus the cast of the show had a really unbalanced team. Once again, it's fine for the show, there's no strategy in there. But this group basically all uses vaccine Digimon, and so many have just some type of fire attack or holy attack. This game is built around it, but I'm just mad because I'm a virus type apologist. Give me some of those edgy boys too. We can't have a Digimon team without something that looks like it wants to murder you. But since we're adhering strictly to a show, which repeatedly had the team split up for multiple episodes at a time, it does mean we are forced out of our comfort zones quite often, and we have to use characters in Digimon we wouldn't normally choose to. But since this is adhering so strictly to the show, it does mean we get Taichi and Agumon a lot. If you want an RPG with complete freedom, this won't be for you. It's very railroaded, and we can't ever choose who our main playable character is for any section. All we get to do is choose the other 2 party members, and sometimes then our options are extremely limited as the team is often fractured. But while this does sound kind of bad on paper, it does win me over as a longtime fan of the original anime. So many Digimon games give us complete freedom, and if you want to play those, go play those. But this is a specific Digimon experience that we don't often get. Some franchises never stop giving us the same exact plot taken directly from its source material, but Digimon isn't like that. It's frankly a novelty here, and I'll give it some passes just for that. This might be a very limited skeleton, but it's also one we never get to see in video game form. Instead of having a flowing open world, we get to do chapters on a mission selection screen. These are broken up into side stories and the main story, with the side stories often being small diversions that break away from the source material, but not enough to mess up the timeline or geography. Early on they're especially tedious since the first several main chapters follow the very formulaic early episodes on Fire Island. Each episode's basically about a different spotlight character, they get into danger, and their Digimon evolve from child to adult form temporarily to save the day. And we get to experience that same repetition here, which does at least keep the early game from being the Taichi experience. The problem with the side quests during this period is they often feel like peak filler. We go through the exact same maps we already did a mission earlier, but for arbitrary reasons. Like the group want to gather materials, or because Takeru dropped something in the sewer and wants it back. Frankly, these aren't fun, but we do get some nice writing here which keeps me coming back. If you're the kind of sad, miserable person like me, who did all the side content in Dragon Ball Z Kakarot, even though it was tedious and unfun, Just because you wanted some more writing and characterization from the cast, then you're in luck. This is the exact same thing, for better and worse, mostly worse. It's not fun, but it expands the characters. And since the whole purpose of this game is to experience the cast of characters again, but in an interactive form, it does win out for me, but I don't blame others if they choose to skip these wherever possible. Sometimes these are unintentionally hilarious, like, okay, Devimon has gone to the human world and he will kill the last chosen child. But how about we have a nice cooking contest where we have to gather materials and cook for each other at that restaurant from earlier in the story? If you want my simple opinion, I wish the whole game was more fun. This is only a microcosm of the overall experience, but as fan service it is quite good. In fact, I love it for existing since it gave us these weirdly chunky and simultaneously ugly, but impressive 3D renditions of a human cast, and everyone is complete with nice, thick outlines. I also wholeheartedly love the Digivolution sequences here, which are all recaptured, though they're not constantly repeated, which is a genuine plus, even if I do want to see them all the time. The normal spinning Digivolutions are here, but now for spinning 3D model, and when they go perfect and ultimate, they are all gifted with the kind of ugly 3D that used to only be reserved for Taichi and Yamato's Digimon. I am so glad we get this ugly 3D instead of a nice, fluid 2D. The ugly factor is just a part of the Digimon experience, and directly comparing this to the anime, this ugly 3D is a different kind of ugly 3D from the original. I like them, they're nice. This is kind of a Mario 64 DS equivalent of a Warp Evolution. For fans of the Japanese score, you'll be happy to know Butterfly and Braveheart are here, and for fans of the English score, I am sorry, but we don't get any of those cheesy bops, though that's a good thing for most people, because the US score just cannot compete. Sorry Digi-Rap fans, I'm one too, but I know when to pick and choose my battles. Let's just let Braveheart win, okay? This game won't win over new fans, and it may scare off existing ones. But for the tenacious few, you will see a lot of nice systems here that are frankly all great, but they still don't fix the game. The battle system itself steals the show for me personally, even if it can seem a bit generic on the surface, and it kind of is. But it captures the feeling of the anime very well, and has nice ideas to prevent it feeling just like every other turn-based combat battle you've ever seen. Just make sure you turn on player control, because it defaults to AI controlled partners, and I'm yet to meet people who like that. Though occasionally you'll get AI controlled buddies who you can never control, but these are usually only for brief segments like Leomon and Andrewmon helping the chosen children. For starters, all the Digimon by default start the battles in their base form, so child form for everyone except Tailmon gets to be in adult form. The various evolutions are unlocked at the same point they do in the source material, so expect to get Greymon first and Angemon last. This does stifle creativity, as I already said, but it's appreciated seeing just how much they stick to the anime's material. SP has to be expanded to Digivolve, and the higher the form the more it costs. The Digivolution lasts all battle unless they're knocked out, and it ends once the battle does. So if you have a lot of battles one after another, the transformations will be a thing that eats up SP, and this is the same resource for special attacks too, so the bar will often deplete. Fortunately, this is one of those games that restores HP and SP every time you level up, and the game's frequent save points restore these bars too. So it'll rarely be depleted for long, and it'll more often just be kind of half depleted. This keeps the majority of battles somewhat exciting, as you're always using your powerful moves with the strongest forms you have, and it can turn the various overly long boss battles into tense moments of resource management. I practically never did regular attacks all game. I basically only ever did it when an enemy would obviously die next hit regardless of what I did, or if I was physically unable to make a more powerful attack. Which isn't just because of SP, but enemies can do status effects on you as well that stop you using them. This isn't the kind of game where you just mash the buttons over and over and do standard attacks until the enemy dies. The standard attack is basically a formality here. It would be weird if a game didn't have one, but I'm sure they expected the audience to never use them unless they had to. What helps us especially is the fact that all the actual cool attacks look the same as they did in the actual anime, except uglier. Since every Digimon has unique movesets and they do change as they evolve, your strategies can change a little bit based on how far they've evolved. War Greymon can't use Baby Flame, Pseudomon can't use Marching Fishes, and Lilymon sure as hell cannot do the same moves as a giant cactus. So, the movesets are always in flux, especially when compared with their rarely seen adult forms. Unless you're called Angemon, these middle forms are basically ignored. Unfortunately, we can't use the baby forms in combat, which is a shame since they were such a big part of the anime, but here they're just cutscene fodder. Takera's Tokumon, for example, gets shafted until it becomes a Patamon again, which is source material accurate, but it does leave the whole line feeling less useful than they perhaps should. On the other hand, Greymon gets shafted in a fun way. After the Skull Greymon incident, Agumon won't evolve again until Taichi has found the courage, and it's nice to see this actually be translated into gameplay. Very nice attention to detail. Attacking order is displayed at the bottom of the screen via this bar, but it directly lays out the attacking order and is easy to follow. All the actions you do, whether they be attacking, guarding, or using an item, take up some spaces on this meter, and generally the better the attack, the further back it'll send you. So it can be advantageous to use a weaker move just to move back less spaces and get a second attack in before the enemy gets there first. So regular attacks do have some utility, but I still won't use them. There are weaker specials that do the same basic thing. On top of that, some attacks have the effect to basically halt the enemy a little on this meter, which can lessen the time until your Digimon can act again. Though the enemies do this too, so it's insult to injury. Cool, I got attacked, and now you got another turn in before I got to retaliate. All the Digimon you could control come equipped with some offensive attacks, and you don't get any with built-in healing until Angewomon, but the Digi-Piece system alleviates this and does so much more. During the very boring bits between battles, i.e. some of the most tedious hallways and unfun dungeons you'll ever see, there will be these boxes scattered around, and opening these and killing enemies both reward you materials and recipes. And in a first for video games, the crafting system here is fun and didn't make me feel like I was playing a video game trying to catch up to an already fatiguing industry trend. Crafting is beyond easy. Go to a menu. Craft it if you have the recipe and required ingredients. Simple and easy. These will be various stat modifiers, passive abilities or new special actions you can do in battle, both offensive and supportive. With this, you can give anyone the ability to heal, revive, and buff, and you can also increase their stats dramatically. And most importantly, the secret sauce that keeps my monkey brain satisfied is how we allocate all of these. Each Digimon line here has its own unique spaces where we can place these digi-pieces. It's a hexagonal grid, but they're designed in a way to frustrate you and keep you thinking, I bet I can get a more efficient system in place. The better actions and buffs have larger and more convoluted shapes, so it can get really hard to maximize this. Often you'll need to pick and choose carefully what is used. During the story, the Digimon also get more room for these spaces, so it gets easier over time, but since the better pieces are still so awkwardly shaped, it almost does cancel out. These digi-pieces also let you start battles in already evolved states, which does help save SP, and it just looks cooler. I'm sorry, but this is a Gabumon free zone. He should have come in here as Metal Garurumon only. Honestly, the game almost has too much combat, but I won't complain since it's probably my favourite part here, and I can't imagine the game would be liked if it was just as faithful as a show and was basically just us walking through a desert with nothing to do for days. But the comparison is there. In the show, evolving really wore them out, and sometimes they'd be reverted back into their baby form. But here, you're just a slave driver, just making them fight constantly at the maximum power they have. However, there is a mechanic here to make sure the kids still have some sense of compassion and empathy. We get a lot of small dialogue sections between the characters, and we're often given the choice of what to say between two options. If you pick the right one, which is more often the level-headed of the two, the character's relationship goes up. And since we have a lot of protagonists, this gets fairly spread across the board. Some moments completely out of player control raise this too, but it's not often. It's only when the situation calls for it, like when Yamato got Sora out of her depressive episode. The relationship system directly translates into battles. If a character doesn't attack and another party member has a good relationship with them, they can sometimes get a bonus free attack, which is just an automated use of their signature move. It doesn't count as an attack for turn order or SP usage, it's just a completely free way to get bonus damage in on the enemies. It's a really cute addition, and sometimes what we have to say is more so what the character wants to hear. Get your Mimi skills on, she wants cola and to go to Hawaii, she won't settle for less. The characterization is really on point here, with the only hindrance being the presentation being very static. I don't mind this as someone that's read a lot of visual novels and is intimately familiar with the source material, but actions like Taichi whacking Kashiro's laptop, or the fist fights between him and Yamato, aren't properly shown, even if the text on screen are saying that's exactly what's happening. You kind of have to use your imagination and not take everything literally. Some scenes were completely altered as well, like the hitchhiking scene is trimmed down, and all the inappropriate stuff has been removed. The Digimon arbitrarily switch between baby and child in some scenes where they should be babies, and Toy Town doesn't have the kids play with the toys because it's easier not to animate those. And many other small changes that I could only perceive because the show is very fresh in my mind. These scenes are accompanied with stock character artwork with ugly mouth flaps, and some of the artwork like Agumon and Gabumon when they're supposed to be angry are a little bit freaky to look at. But it does the job and it helps aid the presentation overall. Things get a bit more lively in these really nice pre-rendered sections. Or in the case of Waimon, it's certainly not lively. Though once gameplay starts, things return to an unfun but functional system. We walk awkwardly in 8 directions. We run whenever a button is held in. Thankfully, the explorative areas are small and linear enough that the movement doesn't drag as much as it could, but it still does drag. Some interior and set piece moments had to be expanded now that they're fully explorable, and they add in their own tedious gameplay things like the forced stealth with Bakemon, and Vandemon's castle being my least favourite thing ever. Like the small changes to the cutscenes, these do change the tone a bit, but what could they do? If it wasn't interactive, I may as well just sit down and watch the show. Everything has to be gamified to some extent, so some of the slice of life stuff is just missing. This is especially noticeable when the kids are back in Japan. But we also get new, exclusive game filler, which does at least keep it from being more than just big epic fights in a row. Now it's big epic fights, with small, less interesting fights in between, which is still preferable from a gameplay perspective. We need some quieter moments for our pacing. The game adds in some puzzle sections too, but the game is also nice enough to just basically tell you the answer if you continuously mess up. Everything is overall faithful, with slight adjustments here and there. The two most obvious changes kind of occur at the beginning and end of the anime. Very early on, the characters learn they can grind in some kind of space-time rift. Basically there to make up for the game basically forcing you from boss to boss quite often without proper training areas, but you can ignore these weirdly boring areas if you want. It's a nice solution to a game that isn't open, that way you can't really lock yourself out by being too underleveled, but you can also skip it as well if you feel like it. But that is just small potatoes. The end of the anime changes things up quite a lot. After the Dark Masters are defeated, the Apocalypse section goes initially the same way, including having to watch all the transformation sequences again. But here we go one further, we have to refight old bosses again in kind of a boss gauntlet. But they introduce the ultimate levels for our characters. These weren't a part of Digimon Adventure, only War Greymon and Metal Garurumon achieved this, but now you can have Rosemon and Vikemon and all the others whose names I keep forgetting. Though this actually does require you to have high enough friendships with everyone, and if you don't you'll get an anticlimactic moment. So in my case, everyone has an ultimate except for poor Joe, cause he and Yamato weren't close enough. I'm sorry Joe, but that is kind of on brand for him. It's kind of cute seeing all the ultimates here, and if there was any point where we could diverge it makes sense to be here, but it also does undermine the Holy Angemon sequence, Not only was that just done minutes earlier, and originally a big moment, but he got shafted in favour of his evolution almost immediately. We got to fight Piemon and Apocalypse, and okay, Holy Angemon's benched. On the other hand, I do love these being here since we get these new warp evolution sequences for all of them, and they follow the same ugly formula the original show did. This is great. I wouldn't be surprised if this was mandated by some higher ups. This is a Digimon marketing game, and this game was released on the 15th anniversary of the original virtual pet line, as the cute intro reminds us, so some extra promotion's kind of expected. But what's around these new transformations is nice, and it feels like a better send-off to a video game than just following the source material one-to-one. We refight a bunch of bosses again, but now they're harder, and it feels noticeably harder too since I can't just keep spamming Piemon with Holy Angemon's kind of busted Heaven's Gate move either. But even after this, the end of Digimon Adventure, the game doesn't end. We get a little filler to see how the characters are after the events of the plot, which is nice, but then the game turns into much more than that. Our war game is here. This movie still holds up really well, and is perhaps my favourite thing to start the Digimon Adventure cast. To non-subtitled fans, you may know this as the good part in the middle of the Digimon movie, except with no scar or jokes about Taichi's mother being a terrible cook. Including this movie here is the cherry on top to the game's loving attempt at fan service. Though we do have to rationalize this as a movie existing in a world where both Tentomon and Patamon have gone ultimate level. The only real problem here is our war game was beautifully animated, so seeing this in ugly 3D hurts a bit more than seeing the poorly animated original show being converted. But all the complaints I could have are mitigated by the fact we just get to run around as Agumon. And they made the whole trippy internet representation here, complete with the tunnels they fly through. And on top of that, for the beginning, we do follow the movie very closely, as it's only Greymon and Kabuterimon here. They don't evolve beyond that, much like they did in the movie during the opening moments. And it's kind of nostalgic seeing these earlier forms that were ignored in the second half of the game. Though the Our War game section here does change the feel of the movie quite a bit, as we have to fight a lot of filler before the big bad. But what are you going to do, just follow the movie one-to-one and just have one enemy the entire time? That'd get kind of boring. Though I am kind of salty that no one is in their movie outfits here. The movie gave really good clothes to Sora, Yamato and Takeru, but now they're just stuck with their lame original fit. Things do break a little when Yamato and Takeru join the plot, since they can both go ultimate, including Takeru, who canonically couldn't do this until many years later. But Greymon and Kabuterimon can't start battles evolve like that. They can still do it once it's their turn, but even with the Digipiece that lets them skip straight to their ultimate forms, they can't do it. It just feels like a small oversight that wasn't picked up during testing. And once the fight with Infermon starts, we're only using the two canonical ultimates, which is probably what I would have preferred. But damn, we have two ultimates just sitting on the bench over there, bring them in too. But at least we get a final Megamon fight here. This whole section is wonderfully adapted and a nice bonus. I am very happy our war game is here. But Sora somehow read her email when she is outside. Okay, that's going a bit too far. What, are we to expect she has some kind of PDA and wireless internet connection in 1999? That's going a bit too far. Anyway, after the movie, the game still isn't done, although I wish it was. The game wanted you to get your money's worth here, unfortunately. Taichi and Agumon are sucked into the cyberspace thing, and if you thought this game did not have enough Taichi and War Greymon, I'm sorry, but we have a lot more Taichi and War Greymon here. He will be the only playable character for this very long bit of filler. We get some nice fan service here, even if it's the weirder kind. We get to interact and partner up with other anime protagonists in the Digimon franchise. We got Daisuke and Vmon, though they're entirely AI controlled. Then we fight their persona or something, I don't know, I kinda clocked that ages ago. Oh yeah, and then we do the same thing with Decode and Guilmon. And it's the same thing, but better because Tamers is great, even if this model of Guilmon makes me uncomfortable. And then it just extends to the shows that I know very little about. There's the guy that fuses with Digimon, there's the guy that punches with Digimon and doesn't fit in with the art style. And we also get some characters from Cross Wars. This whole section is basically just here for combat, and it falls apart because we get an abusable infinite SP Digipiece, and we can combine now to heal all HP for every one Digipiece, so we can just heal every single turn with unlimited SP while the AI defeat the enemy. There is no way you can actually lose here. I get the feeling this is meant to tie in with Cross Wars quite a bit more, because I think that shows kind of a crossover. I don't know. I'm a bit too old for children's anime, I don't have time to watch that. Digimon Adventure is a fantastic anime and one of the best children's shows of the era, and I should know since I rewatched it all recently. Also Tamers too, I just rewatched that in a couple of days. I wouldn't call Digimon Adventure a good game, and the people I'd recommend it to are only the most dedicated of fans. This is a niche and charming, albeit very misguided game, and it has a lot of good ideas hamstrung by it not being fun. But this is the only Digimon game really like it, so it does win a place in my heart. I'm glad I played it, but I don't think I'll ever play it again. Other entries in the series have more to entice you on replay, especially the Digimon World games that force you to raise this bundle of pixels. New Game Plus only begins to highlight two of the biggest flaws with the game. We still cannot skip the cutscenes, and we still have to keep wandering around and talking to every character in the group. While these are somewhat excusable for a first playthrough, this has no need to be here on a replay. And the game still tutorializes you as well. Look, I can use Omegamon, I don't need to know what a Digipiece is again, please. The longer the game goes on, the worse it gets. I swear I was more positive earlier. If the game just ended with the actual anime ending or our war game, I'd be a lot less down on it. That last chunk of the game drained what little enthusiasm I still had left. If you decide to play this game for some reason, and there are reasons to play this game, just stop before you get to the really bad bit. Digimon Adventure was a very boring game, and I'm glad I played it since some of it was neat. Now I can put this game away and never play it again. I'll play the good Digimon games instead.